we want everything to be perfect. You want it all to be aligned. You want this like grand plan and like to fit your project or your passions in wherever, in this big scheme of things. Ultimately, like nothing is ever going to perfectly line up. And so if we can just commit and do it.
Do you ever have so many questions and no one to ask, so they're just wasting away on Google searches you'll forget about in an hour or so?
We had that same problem, and that's why we created the RD2BE podcast, a resource for dietetic and nutrition students looking for answers that their peers don't have.
We are students Macy and Emily and registered dietitian Carl Barnes. We engage in conversations and learn from RDs.
Join us weekly as we gain insight into the unique journeys of registered dietitians all over the country.
Welcome to another week of the RD2BE podcast. I'm your registered dietitian host, Carl Barnes. This is our podcast where each week we interview different dietitians to give a perspective of the diversity of opportunity in the profession, but more specifically to give that insight and exposure to RD2BEs wherever you are on your path to becoming a dietitian, to really get you a little bit more exposed than you otherwise would have. This week I am crazy. I'm excited every week, but I am even more excited this week. So we're sitting down with an awesome dietitian. I do have favorites in this profession, and she's near the top of my list. So Brigette Grimes is another Army dietitian, but she is a lot more than that. She's actually one of my preceptors when I came through my internship, and I will give you guys the context. And you hear this from a lot of our dietitians who talk about being a preceptor and the impact. I had no interest whatsoever in community nutrition, and one person can truly change that outlook. I now counsel people in an outpatient setting. I did that for the last year or so, and you can really pinpoint that on an individual person. So without further ado, Brigette, welcome. Thanks for being here, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. It is certainly a pleasure to be here with you guys. And just to have a chance to share a little bit of my story, my career. It's definitely been a journey to get to where I am. And so a little bit before I get started, just to let you know, anything that I'm sharing today is my own opinions and do not reflect any opinions of the United States government or, Special Operations Command, anything like that. But that is where I currently work. So I am the Command Performance Dietitian for Special Operations Command. And I've been in this role since October of last year, so still pretty new. And it's a lot different. I think we'll talk about it as we go along a little bit, but certainly a strategic assignment when it comes to nutrition and dietetics. And so very different from a clinical role, but certainly rewarding all the same. So I'm excited to have a chance to talk to you all today.
Great. Thank you so much, Brigette, for coming out and talking to us today. Again, I'm Emily, your RD2BE from the University of Maryland College Park.
And I'm also an RD2BE junior at the University of Maryland. My name is Macy. I'll start off by asking, when did you decide you wanted to pursue both a culinary and a dietetic career? And what were your first steps toward both of those goals?
So I will say the interest in culinary arts started when I was in high school. So I took a few culinary arts classes, really, I think freshman, sophomore, and junior, senior year, almost all 4 years, maybe not freshman year. But that's where my interest in food and culinary really started. And then I didn't decide to pursue dietetics really until my sophomore year of college. So I had a couple of key, kind of decision points there that led me to the path of becoming a dietitian. It wasn't something that I started out, I'm going to be a dietitian when I started college. Like, no, definitely was. It started there in high school with that piece. So I had a kind of that fork in the road when I got to like my sophomore year of college, and I could have pursued food service management or culinary nutrition. And I knew that, the restaurant life, as much as I love food, I was not spending, 80 plus hours a week in a kitchen. And that's on the low end, I would say. So it didn't necessarily align with my long-term, quality of life and long-term pursuits. So that's where I chose culinary nutrition, and the rest is history, as they say.
Great. So many dietetic students that I know from like College Park and just in general, really like feeling prepared. So were you the same way?
I know when you guys sent me that question, I kind of laughed because no, I didn't feel prepared, I think, for any of those key transitions in my life. And so what I will say is that I wouldn't change it for anything. But I would say I had really like 3 key decision points in my late teens and early 20s where no one was pushing me to pursue anything. And it was like me making an independent choice. And so one of those, of course, was making the decision to pursue culinary arts. I was like, culinary arts, journalism. I'm like, let's go with the passion project. Let's do culinary. And then when I obviously made that decision to pursue culinary nutrition, I didn't feel like I was really prepared for that either. And then joining the Army, that was my other like 3rd key decision point where I was like, okay, sure, I just got a degree, like let's go join the Army, like no big deal. I did not come from a military family. I did not have a lot of influence going into it. It was just, it sounded good, it made sense at the time, and I just like jumped in and went for it. So yeah, did I feel prepared? No, even like to the day I went to like raise my hand and, do my oath and commission, I had no idea really what I was getting into. I mean, I kind of did, but not really. So I would say the lesson there is just that, it's going for it, picking something, setting your mind on a goal and just like hard charging till you make it happen. And so, yeah, it's definitely not it's hard to do and definitely not the way I think a lot of students approach stuff. It's like we want it all to be perfect. We want it to align perfectly and for it all to plan out as we kind of see fit. But I will say that has not been my experience.
So how did you transition well, or like what tips do you have for adapting into new environments?
Ooh, that's a good one. A lot of it is just being open-minded. And being open to the experience as much as possible. So anytime you're in a new environment, I will say that like it can be a little overwhelming. And I will even say that like each new assignment that I've had throughout my career, even the current one that I'm in, you go into it and you're like, okay, I have all these kind of like conceived notions or expectations on what I think this is going to be like. And then you get in there and it's totally different. So eating a little bit of humble pie, and being like, okay, like pause. Maybe I don't know as much as I think I do. Maybe I don't know the best way to navigate this particular situation, but also trusting that it's going to work out in the end and that you have the skills to be able to thrive in whatever that decision is, that environment is. I think a lot of it just comes down to being just flexible, being open. Those are some of the key things that have helped me be successful in those transitions.
So earlier you mentioned you wanted to do culinary first. So now that you are an RD, what specific ways has that benefited from your culinary experience?
So I haven't used my culinary a ton as a dietitian. The ways I would say I have used it is really through whenever I've been able to do cooking demonstrations. Obviously, I've been able to use those skills. When I was in undergrad, I volunteered quite a bit with some nonprofits where I was able to teach cooking skills. That was a lot of fun. And so obviously that used that skill set. And then I will say the ways that I use it more now, in one-on-one, I was able to use it in a way of like being able to suggest better recipes or recipe swaps to make things healthier for my clients. So that gave me a unique perspective. But the other way that I use it too is street cred. When I talk to like food service people and I'm having to do a lot of procurement, like right now, a lot of what I'm doing is catalog and food procurement and vendors and like all these kinds of conversations. And so being able to speak the industry language is huge. Being able to talk to our dining facility managers, to our food service advisors that are advising our command teams, and be able to give them really speak their language. And a lot of them are like, oh yeah, we know you have those skills, man. Like, let's see you in the kitchen. Like, come on, So it's kind of this like healthy banter that goes too. And so those are the ways that I think it's been beneficial. It's not like, I'm running the food service operation or, I'm the one that's cooking all the time, but that base of knowledge I've been able to apply that in different settings. And I think, ultimately food is the medium through which we communicate nutrition. And so I think it's a great opportunity for us to be able to really leverage that as a tool for teaching.
So I know that you don't really, use your culinary side with your RD, but being an officer in the military, how has being a culinary dietitian or just a dietitian in general set you apart to other people that are dietitians in your, sector?
Yeah, I would say, we, as military dietitians, I think we bring a very diverse skill set in general. The key thing I would go back to again is just being able to liaise with our food advisors. I work directly with what we call our G4, our logistics food service advisors. And so like we tag team and we travel everywhere together. And so a lot of what I'm doing right now is visiting our units. We're doing these assessments of our dining facility operations. And so, being able to, again, have that credibility with them and have that working knowledge to be able to have those maybe more pointed conversations. That's what I think has been most beneficial. So it's a lot harder for somebody that maybe doesn't have the culinary background to have that same level of detailed conversation. And the other thing I think it comes in handy is in policy writing. So when we're writing policy or we're writing, updating regulations, that kind of stuff, we also have to keep in mind the end user. And so sometimes as a dietitian, I might be writing menu standards, or I might be writing a policy that the dining facility manager is going to have to execute. But if I'm not keeping them in mind and, and also leveraging that kind of culinary piece when I'm making those menu standards or when I'm building that regulation, it may not be feasible for them. Maybe it doesn't make sense in a culinary context. And so those are the other ways that I think it's been really beneficial and the way I'm using it right now, like in my current job. Yeah.
So you mentioned the benefits of your culinary experiences, whether it's giving advice to your clients or just having base knowledge. So in your opinion, how much culinary experience, whether formal or informal, would you recommend for future RDs pursuing dietetic pathways?
I don't think it needs to be a formal culinary education. So I have an associate's degree in culinary arts. I don't think everyone needs to do that. But I do think all dietitians need to have a good understanding of food and cooking techniques, healthy cooking techniques, that kind of stuff, where traditionally internships and the clinical route for dietetics, I don't think you're getting a lot of that. And so, however, maybe it's self-taught, maybe it's through a certificate program, maybe it's through online courses. I'm not sure what's out there at the moment, but I think it's just building that repertoire. If that's a weak area for you and maybe you don't do a lot of cooking, let's get in the kitchen, play around with stuff, experiment with recipes, try new flavors, new ingredients, things you haven't tried before. And that can help build that understanding. So it doesn't have to be a formal culinary education, but I mean, if you don't have it and it's a weak area for you, I would suggest finding some way to build it. YouTube videos, I don't know, you can learn anything on YouTube.
So moving away from culinary a little bit, I know you have your Cssd credential. How would you describe that process of obtaining it and maintaining it as well?
I would say generally it's a pretty arduous one, and intentionally so. I mean, when we look at any of our specialty certifications, you shouldn't be able to just like go and get it, no problem. Obviously, a board certification shows that you have extensive experience in a certain area. So, I mean, any of our CDR ones do require that you've been a dietitian for 2 years, that you have 2,000 hours of practice time in that particular specialty. So definitely requires that you have experience in that skill set. And then the exam as well, sitting for the national exam, and then you have to recertify every 5 years. So I'm actually in my recertification year, and man, it's just as bad as it was 5 years ago, even though you're still working in the field, like just having to go back and be like, okay, like let's brush up on all of the position papers. And obviously if you're staying current in the field and you're doing a lot of clinical practice, it comes back pretty quickly. A lot of what I've been doing is pretty administrative. So for me, it is a refresher going back to like making sure that what I'm doing is still in line with the guidelines, and nothing's changed too crazy, that kind of stuff. So, but maintaining it, man, you still have to have 1,500 hours too every time you recertify. So every 5 years. So worth it, absolutely. But it is something that you have to work for, and if that's your passion area, whether it's sports or another area of a specialty area that CDR offers, geriatric or weight management, that kind of stuff, certainly something worth pursuing.
So what would be changed in your professional career if you didn't have that credential?
A lot, actually. I would say, I pretty much got my CSSD as soon as I could. Working with an active duty population, I was seeing a lot of very active individuals, and I was able to leverage a lot of performance nutrition concepts in my counselings and in my group classes. And so I was able to get those hours pretty quickly. From that point on, I would say I've used it in every position beyond that. And so specifically my last 3 jobs, I wouldn't have been able to have if I didn't have my CSSD. And so I was a performance dietitian for an infantry division. And so what that really meant in the big scheme of things is that I was doing a lot of program management, a lot of like performance and wellness programming. We were doing social media outreach. We were doing, our commissaries are like grocery stores. So we were in the commissary doing like cooking demos and booths and that kind of stuff. And so we were doing a lot of performance focused though, community outreach and wellness stuff. So that was necessary to obtain that position that I had. Then my last job, I was the director of sports nutrition for a Division I university, a service academy. And so in that capacity, obviously as a sports dietitian or director, I needed it. And in my current job, I needed it there. So the other thing too for the military is that it's tied to compensation. So I would have taken a pay cut the last 5 years if I didn't have it. So, and I know not every organization provides incentive for it, but some do. And so certainly that makes it worthwhile too.
Awesome. So in your current job, what are the different tasks that you complete on like a day-to-day basis?
I will say no day, like I'm sure you hear from many people, is exactly the same. And so on a weekly basis, again, a lot more of what I'm doing is administrative, I would say pretty much no clinical. There's like, even outpatient performance, sports, whatever. I'm not doing a lot of one-on-one or even group education at this stage. So a lot of what I'm doing is meetings. I attend a lot of strategic level meetings. Some of them are specific, discipline specific meetings. Some of the cooler things that I get to do are be involved in the research and development for new rations. So in the military, when we're in a field environment, they're going to be eating either a meal ready to eat or some type of group ration that's going to provide them with food to fuel their activity or their performance while they're in this field or deployed environment. So we have an entire organization within the military that's all they do is design, research, and develop rations. And so I am working with them to represent the needs of the special operators. And so we have rations that don't meet all of our needs because we have such a high, our service members in special operations have very high caloric needs when they're in these sustained operations. And so what I'm working on with them right now is how do we develop a ration, or how do we refine the rations that we have to be able to better meet the needs of the operators. So that's a pretty cool thing where we could see the long-term impacts of that. some of the like less exciting things are things like writing policies, like when it comes to clinical oversight. So who's going to do peer review? Why are we going to do it? And overseeing the peer review process. Creating a lab policy that gives dietitians more latitude, if you will, to order more labs that are within their scope of practice. So those kinds of policy things that really help our performance dietitians do their job. So within special operations right now, we have 16 positions, but not all of them are full at the moment. But we do have about 16 performance dietitians within special operations. And so I'm also their liaison, if you will, if they have any questions from a best practice standpoint, from a process standpoint. So I oversee the performance nutrition program for all of special operations. So that every day can be different of who has questions and what needs to be fielded. And then I also organize a monthly sync meeting with them so that they can share best practices. We can move the organization forward, that kind of stuff. So that's most of what happens in a week or in a day, and lots of travel. We've traveled probably 1 week, at least a month, to our various units. So we are spread across what are the continental United States and outside the United States as well. So we have units in Germany and Japan, and then we have units throughout the United States. So we are traveling, we try to get to every unit in an 18-month cycle. So sometimes that's hard to get to all of them. And we have 14 dining facilities across our enterprise. And so as we're traveling, a lot of what we're doing is looking at these, assessing our dining facilities and making sure that they're meeting our menu standards, providing them education and feedback if they're not, and really just also collaborating with those units on the ground, having the ability to have FaceTime since we're also geographically separated. So we do a lot decentralized, which is interesting. So in the environment of COVID, it really didn't change a whole lot of our business practices, simply because we are a headquarters, but with so many different locations. I want to say we're across 21 locations. Don't quote me on that. But, so with all of our units spread out across the world, we're constantly having to have virtual communication anyway, because it's just not feasible to see everybody all the time. And then those travel trips become so important to be able to sync with our people face to face and maybe have some of those more candid conversations they're just hard to have on a virtual platform. So
how has your travel been disrupted during the pandemic?
We did not travel, and we've mostly been teleworking. Yeah, it definitely, like many people, threw a little bit of a monkey wrench into some of the collaboration that happens. But certainly, again, like, because we're that decentralized organization, we were still able. We had a lot of the systems in place already to be able to continue our mission.
So how satisfied are you about not doing clinical and mainly doing administrative work?
I will say, when I first joined the Army, I knew that was a potential, that probably by the time I was maybe 6 to 8 years into my career, I probably would be doing more administrative and less patient care, if you will. I know sometimes people get clinical and they think inpatient, but inpatient, outpatient, whatever. At first I was like, oh, I can't imagine, like, I'm becoming a dietitian because I want to help people and like, whatever. But I quickly, after having a full schedule of patients, decided that that was probably not, as much as I love working one-on-one with people, I just found it to be something that was emotionally draining. You spend a lot of time giving, and some people who have that and can give and give, that's fabulous. I just knew that wasn't really the flow that I wanted for my career. And so a little bit here and there where I can get that real, like, woo, you feel real energized for helping people. That's great. And then the other stuff, I like knocking down the barriers. I like being the one that, helps you do your job. So what I have found about myself as I've gone through my career as well is, what brings me more satisfaction, and also, I feel more fulfilled is in, enabling, being the person that is able to, again, knock down barriers, help create policy that's going to help you do your job better, that's going to, provide you the top cover to be able to do the things you need to do, that kind of stuff. So I will say that the last three, but two of the last three assignments have been very much so in that vein, where I'm in a position to have more of that strategic influence. And even though it is more administrative, if I wanted to have some, if I wanted to teach classes or if I wanted to do one-on-one stuff, I absolutely could. I just don't have a lot of time to do that, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess.
So could you go into more details about the other places you've worked as an RD and like how you knew you wanted to transition?
Absolutely. So I did if we want to go from the very, very beginning, but so I did my graduate studies at San Antonio through the graduate program nutrition. Then I did my internship through Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. Both those obviously great learning experiences. And then my first duty assignment as a dietitian was at Madigan Army Medical Center in Tacoma, Washington. And so in that capacity, I held several different positions. And so I got to do some really cool stuff. A lot of stuff that, again, it really solidified. I knew I already liked outpatient, wasn't really into the inpatient stuff. I liked critical care, but it wasn't enough to like keep me going there. But so I knew I liked outpatient and I liked teaching. I'm more of a teacher than a counselor. And that I learned about myself in that assignment. As much as the one-on-one stuff is cool, I like teaching. So I would do a lot of group education and working a lot with soldiers. And what I found too is that in my counseling style or in my teaching style, I related a lot better to soldiers and like the way that they receive information. I'm kind of blunt. I don't like to sugarcoat things. And so I find that population was like really receptive to like how I was delivering information. So it was great. And so, again, some of the reasons why, motivational interviewing and like sitting down with a patient for an hour sometimes isn't, I like it, but sometimes it's not my thing. Anyway, so I kind of started to see this shift in myself of like, okay, well, like these things really, I like these things. I really enjoyed precepting. I really enjoy, mentoring and teaching in different capacities. And so I found that really rewarding. I was able to be embedded with the active duty unit for a little while there too, because a lot of times we spend time in our hospitals and we're not working with soldiers as much. But anyway, I was able to do that as well. And then before I left there, I became the chief of all clinical nutrition services. And so it's inpatient, outpatient, community outreach, patient feeding. And in that job, I was so exhausted. I was so exhausted all the time. And when I look back on that time in my life, I realized that part of why I was so exhausted was because I was working so much outside of my, what I would say my maybe values and skills are. My strengths when it comes to that area. I was spending a lot of time using these skills that like, those are real weak skills for me. And I will say, it's not like a dietetics specific skill. It was more in like, it's more like traits and attributes. Like I was having to do, just work in an area where it wasn't natural. And it felt very emotionally exhausting to work in that space. So, very rewarding in the sense of like, I learned a lot. I was able to knock down those barriers for folks. And in any job, you approach it with the sense of like, can I make it better than when I got there? And I do feel like in a lot of ways, I was able to help move incrementally just a little bit a little bit of change in the organization. And so that also, like, again, helps me identify the things in myself. It's like, okay, I tried it, not really for me. If I never have to do that again in my entire career, I am okay. Like, I'm totally fine. So again, it's just this journey of like trying it, see if it sticks, see if it's something that like brings you joy. If it doesn't, then move on. You check that box and you know that that's not it. So again, the things that like I know at this stage in my career and at this stage in my life, it's finding ways to still teach in other capacities or mentor. And that I try to do as much as possible. And then finding ways to, I do kind of have a big picture thinking kind of mentality. And so how can I, look at the long game, and how can I help now move us towards the long game? And so that is challenging sometimes. But those are things that I'm like, man, I know that I can think in that way. And sometimes it takes a lot of practice to like get yourself outside of like the tunnel vision. It's so easy to do in no matter what environment you're in, school, be it a clinical job or something where you're like, all right, head down, time to grind it out. But it's hard to pause and make room for that long-term thought and that kind of strategic thought. And so that's where I'm at now, is where, I have to spend time in that strategic thought and in the long game, where I know a lot of the things I'm starting in my current job, probably won't see a lot of it come to fruition, but I'm planting the seeds now so that whoever follows behind me can really see that through. And that's just kind of how you look at things. It's interesting. So it's been a journey. All that to say, it's been a journey, and it's just about that self-reflection and really being honest with yourself about, what it is that brings you joy.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a journey that you've had. So what kind of things do you wish you knew back when you were like an undergrad and then in your master's program?
I thought about this one quite a bit. And the best example I can say or use, so I've been in a leadership course this entire week so far, investing in my own leadership and professional development. But one of the things that has come up, I would say numerous times throughout this, and I think it applies in no matter what situation you're in, but people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So it's something where in a clinical setting, in your personal life, like a lot of times we try to come off as being these really, like I'm competent, I know what I'm doing, especially as young dietitians. I have all these skills and knowledge, and like, okay, yes, that's great, but like a lot of times if we're not leading with compassion, if we're not showing people that we care and that we're invested, maybe we won't see the results of that, and people aren't really going to be as receptive to our information or to our knowledge. So I will say that that's something that I know it's not like a good stereotypical, like, yeah, you do this one thing, but like, I do think it's a helpful thing to keep in mind about trying to be a little bit humble and like, lead with compassion, so that people are more receptive to what you have to say.
And then I guess on a little bit more of a lighthearted note, what's your favorite food?
I am born and raised in Arizona, so I will say chips and salsa. And pretty much anything that's like Southwestern or, that kind of stuff.
So what final advice do you have for aspiring RDs currently in undergrad who want to incorporate like a specific passion or interest into the RD professions?
Just do it. I think what I hopefully have shared a little bit earlier on is that, we try, I feel like dietitians in particular, we're a lot of us are type A. I don't know that I would say I'm type A, but I'm kind of there. I'm like in between. But you know, we want everything to be perfect. You want it to all to be aligned. You want this like grand plan and like to fit your project or your passions in wherever, you know, in this big scheme of things. Ultimately, like nothing is ever going to perfectly line up. And so if we can just commit and do it, ultimately, I think that's the best advice I have for you. It's never going to perfectly align. You just got to figure out how you want to fit it in and just take action, get after it.
Yeah, it's like, don't be type A, don't be type B, be B plus or an A minus. Just get
Right? Like, I don't know what that is, but I feel like I'm in that little like gray area, whatever that is. I have some type A tendencies, but I'm also like pretty creative brained and like, you know, so we'll see.
great. Well, thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure chatting with you guys.
I think that was a great note to end on. Just do it. Thanks again for being here, and for everyone listening. Stick around for every week we drop a new episode with another fantastic dietitian. Take it easy.